So what did the budget do? I'm sure you've all read or heard everything that's in there, but let me just summarise for convenience. And I think it's useful to think of it in terms of the two sides of the balance sheet, if you like. So most people in business would welcome the action on corporation tax, and there is a pattern here because in the budget last year, the Chancellor was he was expected to just proceed with a 1% cut in corporation tax each year, and instead in the budget last year, and this was one tax cut that took effect immediately rather than waiting for a year. In the budget last year, he accelerated what was intended to be a 1p cut and made it a 2p cut. Did the same this year. So the corporation tax was meant to go down from 26 to 25 in April. Instead, it's going down to 24. And I would think that we would be on course. At the moment it's 22% in 2 years. I think we're probably on course to get there, to get to that 20% during this Parliament. I think they would quite like to go into the next election having achieved a 20% corporation tax rate, which it sends a great signal out to the rest of the world, but is also very neat in terms of the tax system, because it gives you the same large companies rate as small companies rate, same as the basic rate of income tax, and so on. Bigger increase in the personal allowance than I think we had expected. And that should say, from April 2013. I think people thought it might just scrape over 9,000. It's going up to 8,105 from this April. That we thought it might just scrape over 9,000. It got quite a bit over 9,000. A very substantial increase in the personal allowance. The 50p top rate, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. And I think, given that this was a self-inflicted wound on child benefit, from the moment that George Osborne announced the child benefit changes to the Tory party conference quite some time ago now, it was clear that afternoon that this was going to be a very problematical change because of the cliff edge problem, which suddenly cutting off child benefit created a huge distortion within the tax system, enormous marginal rates of tax, and of course the unfairness. Two people on 40,000 each, and so on. You know the position. So I think although the changes yesterday, which phase it out between 50 and 60,000, won't make everybody happy, I think it's a big, quite expensive and quite complicated step to solve a self-inflicted problem. So those are the main giveaways in the budget. Raising tax. Now, I will admit that when I heard when I was listening to the Chancellor yesterday and I heard the budget speech, and he talked about simplification of age-related allowances, I did not spot that this was a big tax raising measure, a big revenue raising measure of the order of 3 billion over the next few years. And James has mentioned the granny tax. Most papers have got stories on that. And I gather that it's a bit unfair to call it a granny tax because 58% of the losers are granddads rather than grannies, so male pensioners rather than female. But even so, that will stick. And the curious thing, and just coming on to the point that James made about the leaking of the budget and how much of that was intended, how much of it was accidental. I think quite a lot of it came out of the complications of having a coalition. So that the Treasury, to be fair to them, I think were as helpful as they could be, but I don't think much of this came from the Treasury. But if you have four people in the so-called Quad making the decisions, there is long gone are the days when Gordon Brown could keep his budget from Tony Blair until the morning of it. Now these things are out there, so it's it's easy to blame the Liberal Democrats, and probably a lot of these leaks did come from the Liberal Democrats. But also, when you've got the Prime Minister involved, you've got the Downing Street machine as well. I think the Treasury, I'm not just saying this because I deal with them quite a lot. They are generally not that leaky, because they like to have budgets that surprise people, that are seen in their entirety, rather than necessarily dribbled out, in the weeks before. So, and one story I think they definitely didn't want out was the top rate of tax. I think that given when it came out and how it came out, it was not intended to be leaked a few days in advance. I think that one was certainly from the Liberal Democrats, who wanted just to test the water. I think they saw it as the last opportunity to stop it. If the outcry was significant enough, maybe they could stop it. But a lot of the rest was, and by the time it was out, as I was saying to James, my political colleagues had no difficulty, getting the fact that it was going to be 50 to 45 and it was going to be in April next year by Saturday. That wasn't a difficult thing to get. So, once it was out there, I think the decision was taken. We might as well get an accurate version of it out there. But the result of it is, of course, that the only thing we didn't know about, and there may be other things in the small print, but the only thing we didn't know about is a negative thing, which is the age-related personal allowances, the granny/granddad tax. And that means that, a budget which may have been received as sort of, big cuts in corporation tax, cuts in the top rate of tax. All the headlines pretty well, particularly in the popular papers, are going to be about that. So that's a political miscalculation. I think is going to be quite difficult. Whether it's it's on the same scale as child benefit and they have to revisit it and reverse it at some stage is going to be interesting to see. The 7% stamp duty on 2 million properties, 15% stamp duty if it's bought within a company, an attempt to clamp down on tax avoidance in that area. The banks will have to pay, they won't benefit from the corporation tax cut. So the bank levy will remain the same, but it is down as a revenue-raising measure. And they've also, the government has also scored a small peace dividend from the end of the Afghan operations next year. Now, I think they given that this has been known about for some time, I think that is just an attempt to sort of square the arithmetic, because that could have been put into the accounts at any time. But I think that, of those, the top two are probably the most important. I've heard about clampdowns on tax avoidance for as long as I've been following budgets, and I've been following budgets for a very long time, and most of them disappoint. Most of the clampdowns on tax avoidance do not raise as much revenue as is hoped, but it's an interesting one. Was it tax reforming? Well, I think the changes in the 50p rate and the corporation tax rate were definitely of the kind of tax reforming Nigel Lawson 1980s. There was an echo of that. And again, one of the things that happened in the 80s, which was quite successful, was taking people out of tax, as it is said, by raising the personal allowance. But you looked and heard, and this was still a kind of compromise budget between interventionism, a kind of Heseltine budget, and a Lawson budget of cutting rates. There wasn't. It didn't seem to me that it was a true tax reforming budget. Cuts rates by abolishing lots of reliefs. This did so to a small extent, but we've still got a very complex tax system. We've got an Office of Tax Simplification. We've still got a very complex tax system, and I think it remains very complex even after that. Clearly there are losers from this budget, but it was, the decision was taken that, getting rid of more reliefs would have created more losers, and that wasn't the thing to do. I think it was business friendly. And I think, business would have liked more. I heard a discussion on the radio this morning, would you prefer a cut in the corporation tax rate or a cut in employers' national insurance? And, many employers would say, give us a cut in national insurance. That would make a bigger difference. as it would, but it costs a lot more. So a 1% cut in employers' national insurance costs about 4 billion. A 1% cut in the main rate of corporation tax costs about 800 million. So you can get a lot more, bang for your buck, and in terms of headlines, from cutting corporation tax relatively cheaply than you can from cutting national insurance. But I think the big message, and I think they were aware of what recent headlines, whether it's Fred Goodwin's knighthood or Stephen Hester's bonus, a sense that, and some of the rhetoric from the Liberal Democrats, that would somehow, we'd been taken over by, the levellers, that, anybody who succeeded in Britain would have it taken away from them in taxation. Until relatively recently, it looked as though the 50p rate was not going to be touched. I mean, that was clearly the message from the Treasury, from George Osborne. He went to Davos in January and said, give me the evidence, and I would love to make this temporary. Give me the evidence, and I'll try and get rid of it. But making it clear that it was politically very difficult to do it. This was Britain being open for business. I think was a big message of this budget, and quite successfully delivered. Infrastructure spending, deregulation. Infrastructure spending, yes, some of that is happening. It will take time. Deregulation, still, I think, rather disappointing. There isn't a great deal of kind of bonfire of controls type stuff going on. Most firms, I think, would have liked more on that and on certain specific things.